There is a painful realization most people spend years avoiding. Not because they do not see it. Because they see it too late. You thought your connection was different. You thought the rules somehow changed for you. You thought the attention meant something permanent. The effort. The consistency. The late-night conversations. The way they looked at you. The way they remembered small details nobody else noticed. It felt personal. Special. Rare. And that is exactly why the realization hurts. Because one day you wake up and discover they became distant in the same way they once became close. Quietly. Without warning. Without explanation. And suddenly the thing you thought was unique begins following a pattern that countless people have already experienced. That is the uncomfortable truth most people spend months trying to negotiate with. You were never the exception. You were simply the person currently receiving the attention. And attention often feels permanent while it is being given. That is what makes it so dangerous. At first, you do not notice the shift. Nobody does. The change rarely arrives as rejection. It arrives as reduction. A slower response. A shorter conversation. A missing question. A delayed reaction. A subtle absence of curiosity. Nothing dramatic enough to confront. Nothing obvious enough to prove. Just enough to make you feel something has changed. And that is where the overthinking begins. You reread old conversations searching for evidence. You compare today's interaction to memories from months ago. You replay small moments in your head, trying to identify the exact point where the emotional atmosphere changed. But emotional distance rarely announces itself. It simply grows in places where attention used to live. And most people do not recognize the danger until they start feeling relieved by things that once happened naturally. A fast reply. A compliment. A phone call. Basic affection begins feeling like a reward. That is the moment emotional balance quietly starts collapsing. Because now you are not experiencing connection. You are measuring it. Watching it. Monitoring it. Waiting for it. The frightening part is how normal this begins to feel. You tell yourself you are simply being patient. Understanding. Mature. But deep down something else is happening. You are adapting to less. Accepting smaller emotional returns. Lowering expectations to avoid facing a reality you do not want to believe. And most people do not notice the damage until much later. There is a strange thing that happens when someone becomes emotionally important. Their reactions stop being information. They become verdicts. A good morning text improves your mood. A delayed response ruins your concentration. A simple change in tone follows you throughout the day. Without realizing it, your emotional stability begins moving into someone else's hands. And that is usually where emotional dependence begins. Not with obsession. With adjustment. Small adjustments. Tiny compromises. You speak differently. Act differently. Present yourself differently. You start choosing words more carefully. You stop saying certain things. You become more agreeable. More accommodating. Less authentic. Not because anyone forced you to. Because attachment slowly convinced you that maintaining connection mattered more than maintaining yourself. That is the part people struggle admitting out loud. You slowly become less like yourself trying to remain emotionally important to someone else. And sometimes they never even notice. Because the more effort you invest into preserving attention, the more invisible that effort becomes. People notice change. They rarely notice maintenance. That is why so many individuals become trapped inside emotional performances. Trying to recreate reactions that once happened naturally. Trying to become interesting again. desirable again, exciting again, valuable again. As if the connection can be restored through effort alone. But attention does not always disappear because you failed. Sometimes it disappears because familiarity quietly changed the experience itself. People stop observing what becomes constantly available. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. Just gradually. Like someone living beside a beautiful view they eventually stop looking at. And that realization feels deeply unfair. Because you remember how intensely they once noticed you. Every message mattered. Every absence mattered. Every interaction carried emotional weight. Now your presence feels normal. Expected. Guaranteed. And people rarely fear losing what feels guaranteed. That truth has ended more emotional connections than conflict ever did. People stop chasing what feels guaranteed. The painful part is that most people notice this before they accept it. You feel it in conversations. You hear it in their voice. You see it in the way they respond. The energy changes long before the words do. They stop asking deeper questions. They stop exploring your thoughts. They stop getting excited by things they once found fascinating. The conversations become updates instead of experiences. And eventually the emotional atmosphere changes completely. Then comes one of the most humiliating experiences attachment can create. Comparison. You notice them laughing harder with someone else. Replying faster to someone else. Showing curiosity towards someone new. Offering enthusiasm you have not received in months. And suddenly a terrifying thought enters your mind. Maybe it was never about who you are. Maybe it was about how new you were. That realization can dismantle someone's confidence faster than rejection. Because rejection at least feels personal. This feels replaceable. You start questioning everything. Your attractiveness. Your value. Your emotional impact. You wonder whether you changed. Whether you became boring. Predictable. Ordinary. But often the deeper fear is much simpler. You are afraid they adapted to your presence. Because adaptation feels dangerously similar to indifference when you are emotionally invested. And once that fear appears, every interaction becomes evidence. You analyze response times. Story views. Energy levels. Word choices. You begin searching for certainty inside places where certainty no longer exists. And that search becomes exhausting. Yet people continue doing it. Because uncertainty creates a peculiar form of attachment. The less clarity you receive, the more mental space they occupy. The less emotionally available they become, the more emotionally present they become inside your mind. That contradiction traps countless people. The person giving the least attention often receives the most attention. Not because they deserve it. Because uncertainty is difficult to ignore. And most people do not realize how much of their attachment is now fueled by confusion. The frightening part is how quickly self-respect can erode when reassurance becomes scarce. You begin tolerating behavior you once would have rejected. Accepting explanations that do not make sense. Ignoring things that clearly hurt. Pretending everything is fine. Acting emotionally detached while privately falling apart. You tell yourself you are being patient. But patience and fear sometimes wear the same face. Fear of losing them. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of discovering your importance was temporary. And eventually the emotional imbalance becomes impossible to hide. You become the one carrying conversations. Initiating contact. Creating momentum. Maintaining energy. Protecting connection. Meanwhile, they simply participate whenever they feel like it. The emotional workload becomes uneven. Yet you continue investing because walking away would require admitting something painful. The connection no longer survives on mutual effort. It survives on yours. That realization is devastating. Because people often stay attached to memories long after they stop feeling connected to reality. You remember how things felt. You remember who they used to be. You remember who you used to be around them. And those memories become stronger than present circumstances. So you keep hoping, waiting, analyzing, believing. Even as evidence quietly accumulates around you. Then one day a realization arrives that changes everything. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a quiet understanding. The same attention that once made you feel exceptional was given to you by someone capable of giving it to others too. The same fascination. The same excitement. The same curiosity. The same intensity. You were not witnessing a permanent emotional state. You were witnessing a moment. And moments eventually pass. That is why so many people feel shocked when attention changes. They mistook intensity for permanence. They mistook fascination for commitment. They mistook emotional momentum for emotional certainty. And by the time they realize the difference, attachment has already done its work. Because once someone becomes emotionally significant, logic loses influence. You know what is happening. You see the signs. You feel the distance. Yet part of you continues hoping the version you miss will suddenly return. Most never do. Not because they became cruel. Not because they were lying. Because people change emotional positions more often than they change promises. Attention changes before love admits it. And perhaps that is why the realization hurts so much. Not because they left. Not because they changed. But because you genuinely believed you were different. You believed your connection existed outside the patterns that affect everyone else. You believed your importance was permanent. Your place was secure. Your impact was unforgettable. Then reality quietly revealed something most people spend years resisting. You were not the exception. You were simply the person standing in the spotlight while it was your turn. And the hardest part is not losing the attention. The hardest part is remembering how irreplaceable it made you feel. Before discovering how replaceable everyone secretly fears they are. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe for more psychological explorations of human behavior.